of those involved in the report, and we had 19 people saying yes and 4 persons saying no. 19 people said yes, 4 said no. But I'm reading a report in the newspaper from Mr. Sapper. Mr. Sapper, you're playing a very dangerous game. That's the most I would say. You're playing an extremely dangerous and with your comments, you're bringing politics into this thing, and politics should not be in this, especially where children are concerned. I'm very sorry if what you're saying in some of these in this article is in fact what you said, then you playing politics. I don't know that anybody else bringing politics in this thing except for you. And to say that you handed over the report because you're very upset with Verna St. Rose Grace because she called you all cowards. He said he personally handed 40 copies of the report to then former Minister Manohar Ramsaran. It was done in the cover of darkness in a parking lot, car trunk to car trunk, from me directly to Manohar. There was no killing of any report, and we had to do that because we were being watched. What absolute rubbish am I here reading? That a report commissioned by the cabinet, the then cabinet, could be done under the cover of darkness in a parking lot from your car trunk to the minister car trunk? And you proud of that? And you don't want people to think that there was something sinister going on?
We have a guest online now.
Oh, please. Give me a break.
And you agreed to that?
And yeah.
If a cabinet appointed or sanctioned a committee to investigate child abuse and a report is made, you agreed to go and deliver a report in a car trunk?
Yeah, in the cover of darkness.
Car trunk?
In a parking lot.
Someone messaged me and said there are several other reports on abuses, allegations of abuses against children. The Sharp Joan Bishop report, the Jones Sugrin report on children's homes, and a study commissioned by the Ministry of Social Development in 2005. We're going to investigate all of them and see if we find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this ain't the only one?
No.
Apparently.
So
Good morning, Mr. Browne. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Mr. Richards. How are you?
I am fine. I just saw something that really, I don't know what to make of it. But I'm seeing that NGC Chairman Conrad Enel is the new High Commissioner to Guyana.
Yeah, I saw that yesterday.
I have never heard of a chairman of a state energy company. Is he still holding the position of NGC chairman?
That's the question.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. Because there has been no...
Because the article says chairman, they didn't say former chairman, you know. Chairman of the National Gas Company, NGC, has been appointed TNT's High Commissioner to Guyana. A release from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs confirmed Enel's new posting on Tuesday, adding, during a brief presentation ceremony held recently, Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Minister Dr. Mariano Browne presented Enel with his instrument of appointment. Browne thanked Enel for his willingness to serve Trinidad and Tobago and indicated the new High Commissioner would be guided by government's policy framework, which underscores the ministry, its diplomatic network, and overseas missions must be on the front lines of projecting the interests of TNT. Is that normal?
Well, it might not be, but in these circumstances, it might be a good thing. Because essentially what has happened is that Mr. Conrad Enel, if he retains the position of as chairman of NGC, effectively has been made
an energy envoy.
Yes, an energy envoy, a chief scout. And effectively, if he comes across decisions, he'll be able to deal with them or discuss them or introduce them to his management team in a way that they could carry them forward sensibly. All right. Now, you can't make the CEO an envoy from that perspective because he has a business to run. And technically, the chairman has a little bit more time on his hand with regard to policy. So what this does is effectively make him the Trinidad and Tobago's chief energy scout in Guyana.
Okay. So is it something that you support, Mariano?
I don't see anything wrong with it per se on that basis. If that's the intent behind it and it follows through, then by definition it would make sense. because any new energy project in any event will have to pass muster with the cabinet. He couldn't just up and decide he's going to do it on his own behalf.
Yeah.
So that in a sense, I mean, it still makes it doesn't. There's still oversight, and in a large measure, it gives him some degree. He can basically pull resources to what you would look at various things to help him in that regard. So he has a resource base.
Yeah.
As well as if he were an envoy with no inside track with regard to energy sector company, well, what he will be doing is he becomes a message box. He's just to pass on messages. He wouldn't be able to do anything with itself, but he actually has, by remaining chairman of NGC, it gives him the opportunity to consult with his technical staff to determine, well, does this make sense, does not make sense, should we look at this, should we move forward? And the presumption is that there's still an energy committee of which he will be a part. Right, the chairman of the NGC as well as the manager, as well as the CEO in my time, were part of the energy committee. All the people who constituted, if you want, government head of TMTech, Minister of Energy, and so on, and all the various sort of advisors all sat around the table in terms of looking at energy
Recording
policy.
in progress.
So that would have been a useful. It could be a useful.
So it
effort.
can be considered innovative then.
Yes, actually, quite. All right, so I wouldn't what you call it. I wouldn't kick it up too much. I think that it's something.
Well, I was just asking because I didn't know if it was. I've never heard of a diplomat doing that, but I didn't know there were legal boundaries or whatever. That's why I asked the question.
No, I mean there's always the issue of what you call it, role creep, in that will one suffer as a result of the other one, right? Insofar as it's directly related to thinking capacity within the energy sector and also resources within the energy sector, if they have to pursue and look with certain things, it gives him greater clout when he goes to a meeting, right? So he isn't just coming as, well, Trinidad and Tobago is in X, Y, and Z. He's coming and saying, okay, good, I represent Trinidad and Tobago and represent these capacities in this light. So I think from that perspective, it's actually quite innovative and quite a not a bad thing.
And recently there have been calls for the Prime Minister, given what's happening in Guyana. There were concerns about Trinidad and Tobago's lack of an official presence at a recent energy conference in Guyana. And Dr. Rowley is now in Guyana, or left meeting with the leadership in Guyana. So there seems to be some move toward consolidating the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana in the interest of furthering both interests in energy, would you say?
Well, certainly from the position of improving it. I understand that he went off to Guyana recently. The difficulty with some of the Prime Minister's trips is that it tends to be solo mio rather than with the sort of relevant technician and or person who's responsible. Because if he goes and he creates an opening, who's going to follow it up? Somebody who wasn't present? It will be
I gather this trip has something to do with agriculture, though, because I think I'm seeing the.
All right, so is the Minister of Agriculture going with him?
Yes, he is on the trip with him.
He's not on the trip with him.
He is.
Well, that's my point. I mean, that if he goes and he does that's important. That's positive.
Right. Yeah. Because I got the picture this morning. Minister Kazim Hussain is on the trip with him.
Well, that's a positive development. I don't argue the Prime Minister traveling. He's traveling on business in a sense to promote the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't have a difficulty with that. And I'm sure he places great reliance on his deputy, the acting Prime Minister.
Your good friend.
Yeah, Paliwal.
I don't know if I may call him the de facto Prime Minister.
Like you call him that plenty, Mariano.
Too early, you know, Mariano.
I'm not the only one who call him that.
Of course, come over to the midterm review. What's your take on it? Because he talked about the surplus, taking on public debt, putting money in the HSF, paying back returns. So it seemed very optimistic. What's your take? Is it reason to be optimistic?
Well, of course, there's reason to be optimistic. The reason to be optimistic is prices have gone up. The reason to be fearful is that prices will come down the same way that they went up. That's the difficulty. Remember in 2014, we had a sharp, this is not unusual. In 1986, the PNM lost the election because there was a dramatic drop in prices when oil prices fell to $9. And at that stage of the game, whilst they didn't have a heritage and stabilization fund, the PNM had created a whole series of funds which they used to give the country a soft landing. You hear a similar conversation now when you listen to the conversation that is taking place in North America when they talk about a soft landing. And they're talking about it particularly with regard to the increase in prices and a soft landing, right? So that they're making the necessary and consequent decisions to ensure that inflation does not destroy growth. Therefore, they're raising prices. In other words, just dampen demand before demand gets out of hand and we end up with a recession. Because unfortunately, all the tools to cure inflation effectively are demand reduction techniques. Right? And now we talk about a soft landing. Now, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, right, Trinidad and Tobago crash landed in '86 and it crash landed again in 2014. It crash landed because we had a substantial decline in prices. So let's look at the underlying economics and or underlying what you would production figures. Well, we know that natural gas production is 25% below what it was in 2018, and it is 40% below what it was in 2011, which means that by definition, we aren't producing any more. Right? So if we have this great increase in GDP, where has it come from? Well, it's come from an increase in prices. Right? We know that the price of ammonia in 2018, 2019, we were having arguments about the input price of natural gas. Natural gas is a feedstock, right? It does one or two things. You either cool it and ship it abroad as LNG, and you get a sort of as a commodity, and you get a base price for it, or alternatively, you convert it and you export the products that come from it. It adds value. You use value added, and that mechanism gives Trinidad and Tobago a richer tax return and a richer improvement in GDP numbers. Right? All of those companies, in fact, had shut-in plants between 2018 and 2019. You don't hear anything about that anymore. The problem was the input prices relative to the market prices of natural gas byproducts. Ammonia, for example, is made from natural. Methanol is made from natural gas. Urea made from natural gas. And the policy underlying the petrochemical sector, articulated in 1979, is the alternative export of hydrocarbons, meaning that instead of exporting raw oil, what we would do is export items.
Okay, did I freeze or did you guys freeze?
Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, Mariano.
Yeah, right. So that was the policy. So the conversation, you're not hearing any conversation about input prices of natural gas. You're not hearing any conversation about input prices of natural gas because all the market prices have gone up and that the companies can now afford to pay. They have all quietly come to an accommodation with NGC. They're paying the prices. Why? Because the prices of ammonia have been rising since March 2021, right? So everything has been increasing, right? And on that basis, the Trinidad and Tobago's energy growth has been, the energy sector growth, right, has largely been fueled by increased prices. Nobody is talking about plants aren't shutting anymore. All the plants are open and running. Why? Because prices are up, and therefore they're doing better, right? And as a result, Trinidad has done better. The reality, however, is that the improvement in the economic position of the country, the fact that GDP has gone up, is largely driven by price, right? In other words, our production numbers have been improved. What happens when price falls? Well, we go back to the same situation where we were. So that's not a positive development moving forward. It just simply means that we've had a price effect, and in the same way the price effect comes, the price effect.
But wouldn't we be in a better position, nevertheless, even if it is that it lasts long enough and it could reduce public debt to some degree? Wouldn't that be an improvement?
Of course, it's an improvement.
That be an improvement from where we were?
Of course, it's an improvement. It's a temporary improvement. What happens after that? What are the alternatives? If, for example, you were living, your salary was $10,000 a month, and somebody along came you and offered you a job, and you got $10,000 more, right? You would be much better off, right? But the extra income that you were getting was dependent upon certain factors, and it could tail off. What would you do? Would you expand all of your expenses? Or alternatively, will you pay off debt, find some way to use the extra money to make some investment for the day that when that extra money is no longer available. Would you operate conservatively? The answer is yes. So the bottom line in all of this, what we're doing is we're trying to repay some of the debt, bring it down, and so on. Well, I'm not complaining. That's a good thing. But let's not crow, as the minister did in his speech, and talk about the fiscal incentive package and the what you call it, that this represents the epitome of all the policies that the government has undertaken to achieve a sharp change in the economic circumstances of the country. Right? That's rubbish.
Well, politics will create what I call bush. Like when you play cards, you have bush.
Well, you know what you do? You know what you do with bush? You cut it down.
There's plenty bush, and you have to get through the bush to what actually the facts are.
Well, all right, yes, and you have to what you call it. You have to manage your hand. You have to manage your hand. You have to play your hand, and you have to basically manage it so you could get to the situation where your trumps matter, right? So yes, in this particular instance, of course, pay off the debt. I mean, you could see. So we're paying off TNTech, right? We're paying off WASA. We're paying off who's the next one? TSTT, right? We're paying off MTS. We're paying off for janitorial services. We're paying for rent. We're paying for gratuities. We're paying for increments that haven't been paid. And of course, we have not gotten any public servants, right? So we're saying, go ahead and negotiate, and we will find a way to sort that matter out moving forward in the future. Local government elections is coming soon.
But doesn't it also suggest, Mariano Browne, that we still have not been able to strategically improve our position because it still came down to the fortune of the upswing in energy commodity prices that we wait for with bated breath, and it's not within our control because it can go down again next month.
Precisely. That's what you got.
So we're basically in the same position of waiting.
We haven't changed. The situation hasn't changed. The objective position hasn't changed. What has happened is that you had a windfall, right? Your what you call it? Your grandfather died and left you some money. What are you going to do with it, right? Well, I have a whole set of debts. I'm going to pay off the debts. But if you pay off all the debts, what you have left, right? Well, nothing. I can't do anything. But my situation has improved, right? It gives me some freedom to maneuver, right? But if you unfortunately expand your recurrent expenditure, and there's the potential for that, and that's what I look at when the minister says, well, he sends a little sub to the public sector unions indicating we haven't forgotten about you. Well, what happens when you increase those, right? Because ultimately, when the windfall gain goes away, what happens next? Right? What's going to fill the gap? And that unfortunately is where the thinking needs to be. The thinking is not about how things are easy. We have to start thinking about what is going to be the next hurdle that we have to jump over. Right? That's really what we have to.
What are your thoughts on the recent appearance of the energy minister on CNN, where he said that Trinidad and Tobago, quote, we live a good life, one, and that the projections are to return energy production levels, and I'm paraphrasing here, to pre-pandemic levels. And I thought, and maybe I'm wrong, that pre-pandemic levels were below what was expected. Am I wrong?
Well, pre-pandemic levels depends on what you look at. What we had in 2019 was decline in production, right? So pre-pandemic means up to what? What was it obtaining in 2019? Right? In 2018, we had reached about 3.6 billion cubic feet a day, right, with Angeline and Juniper, which basically puts us up. And then immediately after that, we'll be declining. All right. So I think, quite frankly, I really don't know what was his purpose. I don't know if it was to instill confidence in the international community about where Trinidad was, alternatively to ask for help from the US government, in which case there's an easier way to do that. Ask them privately. Don't go and post about all the things that you could do when you're not in a position to do them. Right. So I was a little confused by that episode, other than, unless of course, if Mia Motley could do it, we could do it too.
Well, I could see it. I saw it in two ways. I saw it as positioning the country as the energy minister for investment and presenting the country in a positive light.
Well, what is in what investment into what you call the energy sector require? It requires increased production of natural gas. It requires increased production of anything, right? And if you don't have that, what are you positioning yourself for? unless of course you're telling people to come and to explore in what is a mature province where the risk of generating additional resources is higher, right? In which case, you don't boast, you don't boast on international TV that you have everything. You don't have everything. Quite the opposite, right? You need help, right? So I thought that the positioning required a sharper tool in terms of its statement. What was the intent, right? To say that we could make a difference. Can we? I mean, if you look at the production numbers, and I wrote in the article, my article on Sunday, I looked at the international production numbers. Trinidad and Tobago and Russia are the largest exporters of ammonia, right? So we know that between Belarus and Russia, they control approximately 40% of the export market for fertilizer. Now that's important, right? Trinidad is second largest producer, right? Second largest exporter. How much does Trinidad and Tobago produce? Literally everything that is produced in Trinidad and Tobago is exported, right? So we produce approximately 4,000 metric tons and above, and we export all of that every year. So that puts us second on the rankings in terms of global export. But let's look at the production capacities. China produces 47 million metric tons. Trinidad and Tobago, as the 8th largest producer in the world, produces 10% of what China produces. We are not going to make a difference from that perspective, and China is using that internally. It's not exporting it, right? Russia produces somewhere between 17 and 19,000 metric tons. Well, that's a factor of about 5 times as large as what we produce, right? But the difference is that Trinidad exports all that we produce. We don't use it for domestic agriculture. In fact, we can't use it for domestic agriculture because ammonia is an intermediate feedstock, which in itself is going to be used to produce fertilizer somewhere else, and we then have to report it. If we were talking about deepening the curve and producing, if you want to improving the production capacity, what we'll be talking about is developing fertilizer companies in Trinidad and Tobago, right? We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about we are there ready to assist in terms of the shortfall in what is taken in Europe. But what is Europe short of? Europe is short of oil. Europe is short of natural gas, right? And we don't have the volumes to cover for that. So I couldn't understand the state. What was the statement meant to do, right? Because if we were to sell all of our LNG to Europe at Europe's high prices at $35 per MMBTU, right, compared to the prices we get in the US and so on. Well, even if we were to sell all, it would not move the needle in the European market by 0.5%. So what's the reason for the statement?
Well, I heard you mention, I didn't follow I'll be quite honest, Mariano, I didn't follow the media statement of the Minister of Finance. But I'm reading on this issue of this visit to Guyana with the Prime Minister, where he would have taken and had talks with the Prime Minister of the President, of Guyana concerning agriculture in particular, because he would have taken Senator Ragoobarsingh and Minister Kazim Hussein along with him. What do you think might be the basis of those talks? What's happening in Guyana agriculturally that would warrant a high-level visit like that?
Agriculture. Guyana is a country in the region. Guyana and Suriname are the 2 countries in the region. Guyana, Suriname, and Belize are the 2 countries in the region which are narrowly populated, meaning that their population density is very, very low, right? Guyana is bigger than England, right? England has 70 million people and Guyana has less than 1 million. And the argument is that there are as many Guyanese living in Guyana as there are living abroad, right? So even if you were to double its population tomorrow, right, Guyana is underpopulated. So it has surplus land which could be used. Now, what is the land good for? What's the land good for? And the presumption has been since 1967, when the first study was written, which suggested that Guyana could become the food basket of the region. That's 1967, right? That is 50-something years ago. It has never happened, right? Guyana has more resources than all of the Caribbean, but the rest of the Caribbean put together, natural resources in terms of feldspar, in terms of silica sand, in terms of gold, bauxite. It has everything, right? The issue has been that it has not been an exporter because it is underinvested, underdeveloped, right? And now we found oil. Now, of all the other things that we have, The one thing that Guyana produced and produced consistently was, and it's the only island, the only country in the region that continues to produce sugar. That's it, right? So we're talking about what are the alternative capacities if we were to use that surplus land, and by definition, what were the investment requirements? Now, opening up and going back to what we have considered, or using mechanized labor or mechanized, if you want, support for agriculture, right, is a positive. It talks about food security for the rest of the region, right, and depending on Guyana as part of the region. I think that's an intelligent conversation that we've been talking about, as I said, for 50 years, but we've never done anything with it. So if this could help move the needle, right, that's positive. But it also says that the region also has to do some work. Each individual country has to do some work on its own with regard to food security, right? Still have to do that. Because if you depend on Guyana, you're also dependent on logistics. Anything that takes place between here and there also creates some issues. Admittedly, the distance is short. But remember, Guyana is underinvested in terms of what we will consider to be transportation links, ports. Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, most people are not realize it. I mean, I've seen people argue, well, what has Trinidad and Tobago done, or what was the contribution of Trinidad and Tobago to Guyana's development? Where were we in with regard to all of Guyana's new boom? Well, most people are not aware that the mobilization effort to in a sense, do all the drilling, do all the work that is required to basically bring those fields to maturity or to production. A lot of that work was done in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So we were a mobilization center, so we were always getting spin-offs. Right now, the point is that we may not get any type of spin-offs that helped us, or these spin-offs were not deep enough, right? But that's another factor, all right? There's another issue that has to do with where we are.
Yeah. Okay.
What are your thoughts, the private sector? What are your thoughts on where the private sector is in the COVID economic recovery? There are so many chambers that are still saying that their members are struggling. Their revenue projections are moderate and not being realized, and their cash flow is challenged.
All right, well, let's look at the numbers. Let's go to the CSO numbers. And this is where I'll go use Mr. Imber's look at the CSO numbers. Well, in 2019, GDP was about $160 billion, which is down from where it was $170 billion coming forward. But the numbers at CSO indicate we had 160. So 2018, 2019 were about the same size. And then it fell really dramatically by about 10% to 144, right? And using the minister's own projections for 2021, his projections for 2021, 2022 were somewhere about 150, 160 billion dollars, right? So using his own projections, those were the numbers. The bottom line is that he's saying that the numbers now rose in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, by a substantial amount. When you go to the CSO website, the average GDP for quarter one, quarter two, and quarter three in 2021 is up $40 million per quarter, right? But he's projecting an overall increase of 171 million for the year as a whole, which means that quarter four grew by 50 billion. But 50 billion is a 24% increase on what took place in the previous quarter. So that we're saying that a lot of that is prices. Now, those prices have taken place in the energy sector. Remove the energy sector, and quite apart from what the minister is saying, what we're looking at is that the rest of the sectors are flat. So that the business community isn't crying. It is in a difficult position, right? The uptake hasn't started to work its way through the economy. That will probably take place sometime during the course of this year, right? So I have no doubt that when the chambers are complaining that things aren't great or they're still adjusting, I'm sure that they are. It's been a difficult period.
Mariano, are you reading from something? All these statistics you
that's it.
Well, when you say that commentators they should avail themselves of the numbers, so what do you think I've been doing? Sitting down and reading them.
What would you be doing with this windfall that we're experiencing because of the Russia-Ukraine war and other global situations that have us in this a little more advantageous position?
Right, the red issue is what's the policy moving forward? What are we going to do? The bottom line is, yes, you have to pay off debt. So You have to watch your word. You have to, what people want, what business people always want is certainty. If you have owed me money, I want to know that you're going to be paying me back so that I get some cash flow. I don't want to know that you give me some cash flow today, but I'm not too certain what's going to take place in the next quarter. I might get it, I might not get it. Can't plan the business on that. So what you want to do is that you want to put in an ordered program of deficit reduction and payment of creditors, so that that's what the business community wants. We want to know that you're going to pay us on a regular basis. We don't want to know they're going to pay us today, and then we had to wait again a long time before we get any money again. They want it regularly, right? So what you want is some order in the payments, right? So that you want to set out, you want to establish an ordered payment schedule where I could bring all my all my outstanding items down, bring them down, so that businesses would now be in a position to say, okay, good, we're getting a regular cash flow. This is what we could do. Now, same token, they're not going to be able to depend on that and say, well, this is firm and this is what's going to happen forever moving forward. But it does put them in a situation where they have a better presumption of planning, right? And also they get enough cash flow to start reorganizing the business. I have to tell you, as a banker, right, I never encouraged any of my clients that basically figured they were going to grow their balance sheet or grow their business on the basis of dealing with government. I know most of them have run into problems, right? So my advice is always rely on your normal business. Don't rely on government growth. Rely on your normal business, right? Government growth is a bonus, but don't make your business grow because government is growing, right? Because you'll run into a problem at some stage of the game. And I mean, I've seen it happen many times, right? So you end up government ends up owing you a lot of money. Well, what do you do then, right? You have to go to the bank and beg and beg, and when you're going to get paid, and when you're going to get paid. And
what would you say are the most challenged sectors right now?
Sorry?
What would you say are the most challenged business sectors?
Well, retail and distribution is what you call it, has been challenged because one of the things that we know, and you've seen it everywhere in the world, right? Because consumers dropped out of the market, normal activity fell. Then, by definition, so did the cash flow of all the businesses are dependent upon traffic, right? So those are the businesses that have it, right? The one thing that you knew that was going to happen, people have to eat and they have to buy the pharmaceuticals and everything else. So those are the two sectors, the two retail and distributive sectors that continue. But anything, entertainment and all those other kind of spin-offs, right, didn't do well. Right? And that's where we are.
Is this windfall, as the minister would have referred to it, I guess, is it going to help with our foreign exchange position?
Yes.
And has that ease started to happen as yet?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been hearing as many complaints as before, so I would presume that it has started to trickle through. But every business at this stage would still be in the position. And the one thing that let me give you the analogy of a bank doing badly. A bank that is doing badly and everybody wants to take their money from it. Everybody comes for their money, right? Everybody wants it. They want it today, right? What you do is you make certain that you pay as many people as you possible, as fast as you can, right? And then by the time you reach the 10th, 11th, and 12th, and everybody has started to get paid. And I got paid. Well, then the criticality of the decision, the uncertainty starts to dissipate, right? Well, it's the same thing with the foreign exchange situation. If I can't get. What people do is hoard, right? They find all different kinds of ways to deal with it. The one way to treat with it, right, is to be certain about what the rate is. People will pay more, right? People will pay more. They will complain, but they will pay more as long as they know they will get it. And Trinidad was in that situation for quite some time, right? As long as people were getting it foreign exchange, they didn't have any foreign exchange flight, or at least there was no complaint where that was concerned. Right? And that's one of the issues that you have to treat with. To bring confidence back in the system, you have to give people the feeling that they are certain about what's going to take place. That's why I say to you, right? No, it's not that businesses don't know risk. Businesses understand risk. They take risk all the time. What they don't understand is uncertainty, right? Because they can't measure uncertainty. Was it? You know how we describe uncertainty in the economy? It's mu, unknown. We don't know what it's going to be. It's an estimate. We have no idea what it could be.
What is your take on the state's plan for Petrofin? I saw a report earlier this week that stated some assessment is still ongoing, and there are already so many challenges with other jurisdictions and other companies, multinationals, trying to sell off their
The
refinery
refinery.
assets. And we have basically had that down for, is it 4 years yet? Is it
Oh, 4 years.
for almost 5 years?
4 years.
And what's the viability of a sale for that? Is that the prospect now? Or is it to split up and sell as scrap iron?
Refinery business is important business, but it's also low margin business. That's why energy sector companies are vertically integrated companies, so that they make money on trading, they make money on exploration and production, right? But they generate cash flow on the side of the refinery, because that's the prices at the pump, and we want the cash flow that comes in. It's a cash business, right? It's a cash business, and cash businesses have low margins. Supermarket is a cash business, right? Supermarket is low margin business, but it gives you volume, right? And at the end of the day, the purpose of exploration is to make certain that you have access to the pump, right? Because it makes certain your product sell, right? So that anybody who's interested in refinery, by definition, has to have some kind of margin business to follow from it, right? Because that's the business where the returns are lowest in the energy sector. There may be periods, as we are in now, where the prices may rise, right? But the margins generally tend to be low. So it's volume. And volume means that you have to be efficient, right? And we know that there were a number of projects which were going on, which were meant to get the petrotrain up to an operating efficiency. So the ultra low sulfur diesel project, the gas optimization project, and a whole other series of projects which were ongoing, right? They didn't pan out. Anybody buying the refinery now has to take on all of those previous projects and fix them, right? So and it's low margin business. So I am not hopeful after 4 years of closure that is going to change anytime soon. There's a refinery in St. Croix, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the US Virgin Islands. They spent approximately $1.9 billion on, and I don't think it has opened.
So the prospects for petrotrain are not.
For me, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. You see, you either kept it open and what you call it, try to fix it, and there was value in fixing it. And the government determined at the time that there was no value in fixing it, right? So we're going to move out of it. Now, we don't really know the real position with regard to petrotrain, right? What we have is what is called restructuring light. And what we get is the financial numbers for one part of petrotrain, Heritage, right? Which is the part that was always profitable, right? Now, it has been divisionalized, and each division has been, what you call it, sorted off as though it was a separate company. And what we've done is close the refinery, which is losing money, and basically get rid of all the labor resources attached to the company and all the maintenance expenses to keeping the compound going, right? So we reduced our expenses, right? Now, so Heritage stands off on its own, and Heritage is profitable. We don't know what the position is with Paria. I don't think we see Paria numbers. So we have Paria, we have upstream, downstream, which was put in the position technically to sell gas to Naikwan. Right? Naikwan, I don't think is operating after X number of years, and one blowout. I don't know if they've raised the money to repair it. So we don't know where that is going. So it's upstream, downstream, Paria, Heritage, right? And then you have the holding company where all the debt is, right? And all the ownership structure still is, right? But what we see is a result of one entity, Heritage, right? Well, what happens when we put the whole thing together? Because the cash flow that comes from Heritage is used to settle everything else in all the other companies, right? Now, what we need to know is whether we've improved our position is to look at what the total position is, but we only see in one picture. So we have a very partial picture of what the financial position on that particular company is at the time, how that sector is operating. And I can't say with any certainty how it's going to operate.
Politically, what's the government's biggest challenge in the context of, well, Tobago election was abysmal for the PNM. You just spoke about the finance minister's paying off the debts.
You're speaking like a politician. You're asking about elections.
Yeah, because you have to, because it's all factored into the decision-making process of the government. The decisions to use the windfall, how the government chooses to use it, is not absent of political considerations with the local government election looming.
That's a better way of saying. Well, in which case, then everything that needed to be said was said in the speech, right? He basically, what you call it, dismissed commentators who talked about the need for caution. He indicated that he would be cautious in terms of the allocation, but the bottom line is he has a lot of bills to pay. Right? He has a lot of bills to pay, and it's only, it's a windfall gain, right? So, but these bills have accumulated. The GDP debt has been understated because it does not take into consideration unpaid bills. It only takes into consideration bills for which the government has an obligation, for which it has borrowed, right? Now we know that the unpaid VAT and tax bills was something in the region, unpaid refunds was something in the region of $6 billion, right? We know that the unpaid construction creditors was somewhere in the region of $2 billion. And then the unpaid normal trade creditors was somewhere in the region of another 2. Well, that puts us at about $10 billion has to be paid off over time. And we also know that the deficit was estimated at $9 billion, which is the deficit for this year, right? So the first thing that you have to do is to fill the hole, $9 billion, right? And the law says that if you have a surplus over your revenue in any one particular quarter, you have to put aside 60% of it in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And we also know, remember the minister was boasting about our resources and the resources of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which are available to us. Well, I have always made the point that stock markets go up and stock markets go down. And when the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which is invested entirely in US dollars and largely in terms of market items which are spread around but invested in US dollars, when those stock markets decline, as they have, then the Heritage and Stabilization Fund takes a hit, right? So that we know from the releases which has come out that in the last quarter, right, we took something in the region of a $2 billion loss. So remember all the time we're saying that we had $5 billion in Heritage and Stabilization Fund. It disappeared. Right? So you're gonna have to fill that hole with contributions on the basis of the law, which says you have to precise some percentage of the surplus. And at the same token, with what you have less, you then have to try to pay off the debts and settle the deficits that you had this year. So that what we're seeing really is arithmetic. All right, the bottom line, the GDP numbers have gone up so that the percentage has shrunk a little bit, makes us look a little better. Has the debt gone down? No. Has the cash flow improved? Yes. How long is the cash flow improved for? We're not clear.
Yeah. Mariano, what are your thoughts on how effective you think the new road company that was formed under Minister Faris Alwari, how effective do you think that will be? Because the state of our nation's roads are abysmal at this point in time.
The state of the nation roads are abysmal and largely associated with leaking underground mains. Right? If you don't replace the mains, your roads would always be leaky. Your roads will always be in difficulty. You have to maintain roads under the best of circumstances. There will be normal traffic, and the roads won't build for the kind of weight that they're now carrying. Right? We have 20 and 30 tons on roads which are built for 10 and 15. Yeah. Right? And you have leaking mains underneath. But that's a recipe for confusion. So the bottom line is either one, you build the roads to meet that level of heavy traffic. Right? You see, you could see it on the Beetham Highway, especially when the trucks turn. The tanker trucks turn. When the tanker trucks turn, if you come through, it's like the Bocas. Yeah. Right. Well, that's happening all over the roads. And then you have leaking underground mains. Right. If you only fix the leaks one at a time, but when you fix the leak in a pipe, right, especially if they are old pipes and old cast iron pipes, well, it just breaks out somewhere else. Cascade is a living example of that. The road was repaved just before the pandemic, right? Well, Cascade now is full of potholes. Why do they have potholes? Well, because the underground mains are leaking. The only way you can deal with that and to fix the roads, you have to fix what is under the road, which is causing the substructure to collapse. Water, right? And we know that that's another ongoing problem. That's a $15 problem. You can't fix it in 1 year, but you have to plan to fix it over a period of time. And saying that WASA gets a subvention of $2 billion a year, if that's all you're doing is keeping WASA alive, right? So it's not a question of restructuring. Those are things that have to be fixed, and they have to be programmatic.
Yeah. All right.
Much more to ask, but we're out of time now. Thank you so much, Mariano Browne. We appreciate your commentary this morning.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, all the best.
Mariano.
Thank you
Take
for
care.
your time. And I told you no tie required, but I see you put your tie on.
Recording stopped.
All the best to you, Mariano. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, all the best. All right, let's get into our news brief. All courtesy Champlain Auto Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
Former Minister